Welcome back everyone, this is Clémence with the Gourmandise School for the very last video of our 7-day bread camp. This is the third video in our sourdough bread class, and we broke it up into making the dough and shaping the dough, and now we're going to be baking the dough. So what I want to teach you right now is very simple. It is how to slash your bread so that you have one exit point for all of the water that's turned to steam in your bread dough to be able to escape, so that it doesn't stay inside your bread and remain like really gummy and make your bread heavy. So the reason that it's really dark right now is because it's 4 o'clock in the morning and I want my house to smell like bread, and I was up anyway, so I went into the refrigerator, and I'm not expecting you to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, but my breads have been rising for about 12 hours in the fridge, and I'm up anyway, so rather than watching trash TV, which will happen right after this, I'm going to bake off the bread so that when everybody else wakes up in the house, it'll smell like bread. But I want to show you first how you can tell if bread is fully proofed. So I'm going to take a slightly floured hand. I'm going to poke the bread. If I poke the bread and it doesn't bounce back up right away, that means it's proofed. If I poked it and the whole thing deflates, that means it's overproofed and there's really no saving it. So when you're doing a proof in the refrigerator for a long period of time, you don't really need to think about it too much, because it's not going to happen as rapidly as if you did things at room temperature. So there are 2 ways of slashing your bread. One, I mean there's many more, but I'm going to show you the 2 most preferred ways. One is to use a serrated knife, and the other is to use a razor blade. Either way, what you don't want to do is like a heavy sawing motion that's going to deflate the bread. You just want one quick motion like this, and you can go in pretty deep. Don't be afraid to do that. I'm going to do this on the diagonal because it's fun, and why not? And when you're doing it, I want you to practice good knife skills techniques, and that means not doing this. Don't lead your cutting or your chopping with your index finger. Plant your thumb and your index finger here on that little corner piece here, and you're going to use one sweeping motion rather than this. So I try as often as possible not to work with my wrists, but to use my whole body to pivot, and that's what I'm going to do to slash this bread. I also don't want to go straight down. I'm going to turn my knife ever so slightly on this angle and just give it one good slash. You ready? And I'm going to turn my hand just slightly on this. I'm doing it so that the blade can go kind of underneath the bread. Sometimes if you feel like bread is a little tacky, you can put a little bit of flour on top to give your knife a little bit more friction. Are you ready? All right. We're just going to slash this bread like so. I'm going to go in a little deeper. I'm going to give it another pass in this direction, but I want to make sure I'm not deflating the bread. And this is going to go straight into the oven. So to bake a pan loaf, I like to bake it at like 425 degrees. It doesn't need to go in any other kind of vessel. When I'm baking my boule, my sourdough, my beautiful round sourdough bread, let me go get my magic of TV one. Hang on. This one, I bake it in a Dutch oven. So I have preheated, let me move this aside and pretend like we baked it off, okay? What I've done to make my big, beautiful sourdough boule, this round one here, is I have taken a Dutch oven, which is this pot here, and I've preheated it with my oven at 500 degrees. You want to get your Dutch oven to preheat with the oven at the highest temperature that your oven can get. I also preheated the lid. You want to make sure that you're using a Dutch oven that has an oven-proof lid. That means it's not made of plastic or rubber. And that's my cat. He's the meanest cat ever, and he's begging me to let him out so he can go beat up other cats in the neighborhood at this hour. We're just going to ignore him. So Dutch oven, really, really hot. Please use 2 gloves. And the lid are both really hot. What I want to do is to get the bread to go immediately in a really, really hot vessel so that all the water in the dough can very quickly turn to steam as quickly as possible. So here's how we're going to do it, and here's how we're going to slash this bread. So I'm going to take my parchment paper and hold it nice and taut. I'm going to flip the bread over. There we go. Lift this up. And I'm going to take a razor blade this time. You can use a serrated knife if you'd like. And you can also use a holder. It's called a lame that can hold your razor blade. I don't really love this tool. I know a lot of people swear by it, but I feel like I have more control when I'm holding. Do you hear him? He's the worst. Okay, so I'm going to hold my blade like this. Maybe I'll I'll move this over so you can see better. And I'm just gonna run my arm down here. I'm gonna make this a little bit deeper and just go quickly and efficiently, really get in there, follow that same line. And then you're gonna use the parchment paper to pick up your dough, drop it into the Dutch oven. Please put your gloves on. Pop the lid onto the Dutch oven. And we're gonna open up the oven here and pop the Dutch oven into the oven. So, I like to bake this bread for about 20 to 25 minutes with the lid on, and then I take the lid off and finish cooking it for another between 5 and 10, maybe 15 minutes, depends on your oven. My oven at work is very different than my oven at home. I do not have a convection oven, so I bake it until I get the color that I want. This color is stunning. This is called bien cuit. In French, that means well done. We do not apply this terminology to meat. We only apply it to baked goods. And it means that the outside is nice and caramelized. We're gonna stay with a nice crisp crust on the outside. And it just gives you more color and more flavor. Do not be afraid of a slightly darker bake than you might be used to, because it'll keep the crust nice and crisp. All right, so I'm gonna cut into this loaf for you so you can see the inside. So this bread has some cooked porridge put into it. So I cooked some like amaranth and quinoa, a bunch of different grains, and I added those when I was doing my first stretch and fold into the bread dough. If you go on our website, we have in the blog post a whole area on how to cook grains. So as long as you have already cooked grains so that they don't suck the water out of your bread dough, you can fold them into your bread. And I like to use no more than 30% of the total weight of the bread as my porridges. So if you have leftover cooked wild rice, Chef John, one of our other instructors that teaches the bread class at the school, he does a fantastic bread with millet and wild rice. The flavor is outstanding. All right, so take a look inside. Do you see that crumb structure? We have some big open holes and some smaller holes. You can only get that from lean doughs. Earlier this week, we made milk bread and we made brioche, we made challah, and our holes were much smaller because there was so much fat getting in the way of gluten being able to expand and make your bread dough rise. So lean doughs will give you more open hole structure like this, so will less whole wheat flour. The problem is white flour doesn't really have flavor. So play around with your recipe, see what it is that you like. Don't be afraid of making a slightly stiffer dough when you're first starting to make sourdough breads, because a wetter dough is more challenging to shape. If you have a convection oven for all other baking, whether you're baking pastries like cookies and things, it does matter what temperature your oven is at. So if you have convection, you always want to work about 20 to 25 degrees cooler than a recipe calls for, because there are no recipes written for convection ovens. A very small number of people actually have them. They're more efficient, they work faster, but the trick is to keep the same amount of time in your recipe, but to turn down the heat by about 25 degrees. It doesn't matter if you have like a steam injection oven or a convection oven. If you're baking this bread in a Dutch oven, you still want to use that, and all that other stuff doesn't quite matter so much. Thank you so much for having spent the last 7 days with us. I hope that you'll refer to these recipes as often as possible, and that you'll email us at hotline@thegourmandiseschool.com whenever you have a question. Hoping to release a bunch more recipes related to donuts, maybe pies. Send us your suggestions as we weather all of this with you. I'm also going to encourage you as often as possible to use the best quality flour possible and the best quality butter and chocolate. After all, these are the most important things in our baking arsenal, and they do make a huge difference in the quality and the flavor of our baked goods. Don't be afraid of whole grain flour. Just cut back on the flour a little bit, or increase the liquids a little bit to compensate for the fact that bran, which is giving you a ton of flavor, is thirsty. Email us again, check us out on IGTV, and happy baking. Be well, be safe, and team gluten. Bye.